Today's episode is brought to you by MRC, a branding studio hailing out of Raleigh, North Carolina, where they focus on crafting killer design work for clients that love uber creative solutions for companies small and large. You can find and connect with them online at mrcraleigh.com. That's MRCRALEIGH, and at MRC Raleigh on Instagram. The good news is, if you find yourself reaching out, you'll most likely get to chat with yours truly. That's right, it's my little branding co, and we're here to make your brand or idea look amazing. So let's connect. Today's episode is also sponsored by Bernie Wild's Adventure Sauce. Bernie Wild's is an adventure brand that's a place where my love of art and food come together in all the right ways. Bernie Wild's Adventure Sauce is a chef-driven heat sauce that in my book is literally the tastiest and most versatile condiment on the planet. This is an everyday sauce that's perfect with salads, fries, burgers, sushi, and pasta. I call it comfort food in a bottle, and it's 100% all natural, plant-based, gluten-free, and flavor-packed. Its unique, craveable flavor has a chipotle smokiness that's perfectly balanced with its creamy carrot base, mixed with a bit of maple syrup, charred onion, miso, and ají amarillo. But don't take my word for it. If you want to see what others have to say, visit BernieWilds.com to check out more. And speaking of, we also sell Bernie Wild's comic books and comic panels created and signed by me, not to mention super dope stickers, shirts, and more. I'm giving each and every one of our Pencil Pushers listeners 20% off for their first online order to show my love for all you supporters of the podcast. So just go to BernieWilds.com, place your order, and enter the code PENCIL. That's BURNYWILDS.com. That's it, folks. It's that easy. And now, without further ado, on to the show.
Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Hello and welcome, Leadheads, to another fine episode of the Pencil Pushers Podcast. I'm, as always, your humble host, Mike Rosado, and I'm thrilled to have another one of my favorite past guests on the podcast once again, the lovely and talented Hayley Barry. Today's episode is a special one as we dive into some of the most important business tips for creatives. Whether you own your own studio, working freelance, or work for an agency, every creative these days needs to learn how to maximize their professionalism. Whether it's talking about finances, how to curate your social content, or how to be productive and proactive in getting ideal clients, this talk will leave you inspired and ready to up your game. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Y'all settle in, relax, and enjoy my chat with Hayley. All right, we are here with Hayley Barry. I'm so excited to have her back. One of my favorite guests that's been on the podcast before, and we had such a great time chatting. As the Pencil Pusher podcast has been sort of evolving and me wanting to find different ways to be expressive and helpful and valuable to people who are listening into the podcast, one of the things that's always seems to be pervasive is this idea of the starving artist myth. And, we've had this issue for so much, for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, but certainly for the past several hundred years, I would say. And Hayley is such a creative talent, such a wonderful human being, but she's also, one thing that I noticed very quickly when we were chatting was the fact that she was also very savvy when it comes to business. And so I really am excited to talk a little bit more about some pro biz tips for creatives so that they can be more successful, whether or not they're working for themselves or working for a company, because even working for a company, it's good to have these kinds of business tips. So firstly, I wanted to say, Hayley, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. I loved doing the podcast before, but I get so jazzed anytime we get to talk about business as it relates to creativity. So I'm really excited.
Awesome. So just a brief reminder, in addition to Hayley being a savvy businesswoman, just to give a little bit of an overview, she's also a graphic designer, a lettering artist, a teacher, a mural and sign artist, and then many, many other creative things I'm sure that we'll discover as, maybe she'll discover as she moves along too in her life. What we want to do is have a discussion that hopefully will give us and our listeners and myself, honestly, I feel like this will be a good back and forth because we're both business owners in a creative field. Mm-hmm. some tips on how we can better inform ourselves on being successful, because unfortunately, a lot of times we're dealing with issues of not having enough business savviness. I've talked about this before on the podcast many times. I really strongly believe that art colleges should require a minor in business, and they don't. And I don't really understand why, because if you want them to succeed, especially these days, with the advent of working from home and having the ability to immediately access business and creative resources, there's so many different ways that you can be successful independently. It feels, hopefully, that tide will change, and maybe this conversation will help that. So Hayley has put together a list of topics that she felt were really important to remember. And then I've peppered in a couple of thoughts as well that maybe we can talk about as we move along. But if we could, firstly, I think it'd be wise to first get your thoughts. I'd love to get your thoughts, Hayley, on what you think about the starving artist mentality and the myth that's been going on, and how you feel like that's affected creatives over the years and even today, obviously.
Yeah. I think the thing that's tricky about the starving artist mentality is that it is a myth, but it's also a reality for some people. And I think the thing that determines that is whether or not you are savvy about the way that you're running your business, right? Because I do know a lot of people who are out there making work in their basement that never gets seen by anybody, and, living at their mom's house and kind of just mooching off of other people that aren't doing well. And I think those are the people that give the whole group a bad rep, right? But there's tons of other people out there that are making really successful livings. They're supporting families. They're making a difference in their communities. They're giving back financially and otherwise in a lot of really special ways. But I think oftentimes those people don't get noticed as much, or something. I don't know. Maybe it's just because the starving artist is more comical. We see that showing up more in media and things like that. Yeah, it's just kind of a funny thing. But the fact is, you don't have to be a starving artist. I've talked to people before who have said things like, well, you have to pick. You can either be successful or you can live your dream and be creative. And that's ridiculous. There's no reason you can't make a living with a creative endeavor, but you do have to be very purposeful about it. It's not something that just happens on accident, but it's totally something that's within reach. And I think one of the most important things is just getting over that. I was actually really lucky because growing up, I had my grandpa on my mom's side and an uncle on my dad's side that were both commercial illustrators. And so right. Growing up, I just saw it as a job. I think a lot of other people, they don't necessarily know what artists do, right? They just think, artists paint, but they don't really see it. But I saw that they got up in the morning and they worked and they had to do contracts and they had to go to meetings, and I just kind of saw the whole thing. So I think for me it was easier just because I never...
Sure, you had the context.
I saw the fun parts, but I also saw that it was a job. But I also saw these guys, providing for their families and owning a home and doing just fine and going on vacation. And so it was never this unrealistic thing. But I think it's really important, though, that we need to talk about it because, like you said, schools aren't teaching business stuff. So a lot of people, they have this idea that they want to be an artist, but they have no idea how to actually turn that into a career.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really tricky conundrum. At least I am encouraged by the fact that I do feel like there are more and more people like us that are stepping up to the plate and realizing that that it doesn't have to be that way anymore, And I think maybe the context that you got with some of your family members, we have more context now because with social media, we're seeing so many other people doing it. And there's so much information out there as to how to do it now too, which is really great. So I think maybe from here, I'd love to just start working through this list because I know we'll probably have a lot to say about each one of them. But let's start from the top and kind of work our way down. Your first bullet point that you wanted to talk about was don't wait for work to come to you. So can we just talk a little bit about that and what that means for you? Yeah,
I think one really important thing to realize, especially when you're just beginning, is that work doesn't fall from the sky, right? This isn't especially if you're working freelance, it's not like a regular job where you go get one job, you interview, you get a job, and that's your job. You have to constantly be getting new clients and onboarding new people and keeping these projects moving, right? And so being able to do client outreach and figure out how to connect with those clients is a super duper important thing. And so if you're just sitting at home making work, that's not enough. You have to be, actively pursuing that work. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I know that when
because that can be a little overwhelming for a lot of people. They're like, I just want to draw. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think most of us, we get into this job because that's what we want to do, right? But I think the thing you have to think about, though, is your art doing you any good just being in your house where no one is seeing it, right? And I think that's the first thing to realize, is that if you're going to create something, why are you creating it? Like, are you creating it just so that you can enjoy it yourself, or are you creating it so that it can make an impact on the world and affect people and bring joy to people and even help a business be more successful? And I think kind of realizing that does make the outreach easier if you can kind of get past that and realize, like, all right, I love to create, but I also want my work to have an impact on people. And the way that that's going to happen is by actually getting it out there into the world. And there's tons of ways you can do that. But I think the thing that you really have to be willing to do, especially in the beginning, is just to reach out to clients that you want to work with. And this freaks people out, that especially right in the beginning, you just can't be scared. And the best way to start is just to start. When I was very first starting out, I was only 18. I was straight out of high school. And I was like,
which
all
was
right,
only what, like 2 years ago or something like that?
No, obviously it's not that. Let's see, it was 7 years ago.
Gotcha.
7 years.
I'm just messing, yeah.
I know. I look like I'm like 12 though, so whatever. But no. I was just young and I didn't know anything. And you know what? Maybe that's a big help for it. Because if you don't know anything, you're not really worried about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that fear of failure is something that holds a lot of people back. But the fact is, you just can't worry about it, right? And so what I would do when I was very first starting is I would go around my town and I would find any kind of business that I thought needed me, right? Because that's a market, right? Someone that has or needs what you have and has a budget. Mm-hmm. And so I would go around to these different places and say, like, oh, well, this restaurant has a big empty wall. They should really hang some art on that wall. Or, oh, this place has a dumb logo. They should really get a better logo. And I would go I'd like go in and talk to people. I mean, that's important, actually, talking to people. But I would figure out who the owner was or who the manager was. And I'd either talk to them directly or make sure I got their email. Yeah. And I would send them my crummy little portfolio. And I'd say, hey, I'm Hayley. I noticed you have a big empty wall. I could put something on there that would be great, right? And the thing that is important to mention here is that when I did this, probably 85% of people either never got back to me or said no, right? No, thanks, we don't need that right now. Okay, but when you're a freelancer or any kind of artist, you don't need, a million clients. You just need a couple to really get the ball rolling. And that's what happened for me. I was able to get one real client that hired me. I think my pricing back then was absurd, but it was so little, so they paid hardly anything, which was okay though for then.
Right.
But that was my first job, and I was able to get a job, and then I was able to put that real job on my website with a real testimonial from a real client. And after that, slowly other people see that, and you're able to just kind of get the ball rolling. But that ball is never going to start rolling on its own. You have to be willing to get out there and do the work. And another comment that comes up a lot is sometimes people say, well, I don't want to do any of that. I'm just going to get a rep. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. But guess what? Reps don't hire people who have no experience. Okay. When you're out there shopping for a rep, if that's the direction you want to go, they want to see that you know how to work with clients. They want to see that you've done real experience in the real world. All right, so just saying, well, I'm just going to wait for a rep to come get me and they'll get me work, that's not going to happen. You've got to do that legwork in the beginning. And then eventually, if you say, oh man, I hate doing this, like I really do hate, searching for clients, after you've got a few, you can get a rep and they can do that for you, and take a percentage. But you're not just going to be able to get someone to do all this for you, especially in the beginning. You've got to be willing to get out there and do it yourself and not be afraid of people saying no.
Yeah, absolutely. So just out of curiosity, though, is 7 years deep now for you. Is that something that you kind of actively go for? Do you have a rep do you have no interest in that? Or, what is it like for you?
I have no problem doing outreach. It's never bothered me. And so for me, having a rep take 25% doesn't make sense, since it is something that I'm happy to do. But I know a lot of other people that they don't enjoy accounting and they don't enjoy invoicing and they hate negotiating. And so having a rep is really beneficial. And them taking that percentage is totally worth it for them. But for me, that kind of thing doesn't bother me. I actually like working directly with a client. I don't feel like I need... Well, another good benefit of having a rep is they can sometimes be the bad guy, right? So if you've got some kind of problem that arises in a project, one of the jobs of a rep is to kind of be the bad guy that says the hard stuff. But I don't have any problem being the bad guy. I have to be the bad guy. So, but we'll talk about that later when we get to contracts. But yeah, you have to be proactive about it. And another thing that I think is really interesting that I'm realizing now, because now I'm 5 years into running my business, like officially, and one thing I'm realizing is that you still have to be proactive. So in the last couple of years, I got to the point where I wasn't doing any client outreach. I was doing zero, because I was at the point where my work was good enough and people knew me that all the work was coming to me, and I was just able to pick and choose the projects I wanted to do. But just in the last 6 months or so, I was looking through a lot of these projects and I was thinking, man, these have been really great. But because I've stopped actively doing my own outreach, some of these types of clients aren't necessarily like perfectly in line with the sorts of jobs I want to be doing. And so I think too, even if there is a ton of work coming in and you don't have to do outreach, there is still benefit in doing outreach, because first off, it just keeps you on your toes. It makes it so you're always actively pursuing goals, right? If there's dream clients out there that you want to work with and you're pursuing them, I think that's great. I think that helps you build resilience. I think it's good. But it also just makes sure that you are still actively controlling the direction that you want your business to go. Because if you're just taking all the jobs that come into you, there's a good chance that some of those are going to kind of fall outside of maybe what your dream client is. And so if you're continuing to do outreach, even if you don't necessarily have to, there's a lot of benefit in that, because what that's going to do is it's going to continue your business moving in the direction that you are taking it, not necessarily the direction where your clients are pulling you, but you are playing an active role in figuring out who you want to work with.
So one of the things that really struck a nerve for me and was a reminder of in my own business as well, was when we spoke last, you mentioned this idea of being okay with saying no to clients. You said something to the effect of like, if you're not letting go, if you're not saying no to something like 50% or even higher of the potential work that comes through, then you're not pricing yourself at the right range. But I'd love to hear you speak a little bit to that, because I still think there's some connective tissue to that first bullet, but also not just from the financial standpoint, but also guiding yourself towards the right kind of client. So if you could, like, not just from a monetary standpoint, but from the standpoint of somebody who understands the value of what you're bringing to the table, is not just looking for some cheap artist or, somebody who doesn't really care to throw something up on their wall. They're looking for X amount of things, but you need to be doing that interview process yourself, right? Like, to make sure that you're excited to work with them and they're excited to work with you. So what are those things you look for? Yeah.
Well, like you said, first off, the pricing thing is big. I do always say that if you're saying yes to more than 50% of the projects that are coming to you, you're probably not charging enough. That's always a good way to be able to tell if you're charging enough is are you saying yes to everything? Probably means you're not billing enough. But also, I loved what you said, though, about kind of having a vetting process, because that's really important. And there's a few red flags that I always look for. So the first one is, if I get an email from a potential client and it says, hey, I heard that you were a graphic designer, right off the bat, I do not want to work with that person, okay? Because they, it's true, I am a graphic designer, but they are not familiar with my work. Okay. Right off the bat, if someone just says, I heard you do this, right? I'm not interested. I want someone that says, hey, I found your work here, or, I've been following you a long time, or whatever. So for me, it's really important to only work with clients that are excited about what I do. Okay. Because there's nothing worse than having a client that wants you to work in a style that's not really yours, right? If they're just like, well, I like this stuff or this or this or whatever, right? That's not fun. You want to work with clients that love you, okay? And that's always the thing that makes me the most excited is sometimes people will send me emails and they're not just like, hey, I really like your work, but it's like, I love you. I love your art. I love, your personality. I love this and that. And then you kind of know, like, all right, this person understands right off the bat what they're getting into. They know that my work is a good fit for what they want. So that's one red flag is if they don't seem like they actually are familiar with your work, that's maybe not the best fit.
Yeah. What about for creatives that don't necessarily have the reputation yet?
Yeah, I think that's totally okay. Because when you're starting out, you do just kind of need to take stuff. One thing that's also important, obviously, is working for clients that value the same things as you. And obviously, you can be more picky as this goes forward. But like for me, okay, well, here's an example, right? I remember one time reading, I forget who the artist was, but she had a client reach out to her that wanted her to do an alphabet book, but it was like a pornography alphabet book or something. And it was like the weirdest thing. And they wanted to pay her like a lot of money and it was going to be published, these bookstores. But she was like, I'm not interested in pornography. Like that's not something I want to do. Right. And so obviously that's a pretty extreme example, but like, I'm not a vegetarian, but like maybe if you're a vegetarian, right, and a sandwich meat company wants you to do something, you kind of got to decide, like, all right, does that fit within my values?
Sure.
Is that something?
Sure. I'm actually vegan, and I work a lot in the food and beverage industry, and it's that topic has come up. That's for another conversation for sure, because I've figured out ways in which I feel like I still bring value to that. I can still bring value to that, but yeah, absolutely.
And that's totally something that every person has to decide on their own, right? Like, I don't drink alcohol, but if like an alcohol company wanted me to design an awesome label, I'd probably do it. But there's other topics where if someone asked me to be involved, I would say no, because it doesn't fall within values that I have. So that's really important. But another thing that I think is important is as you get farther in to having a brand and you can be more picky, you can be even more selective. So like for me, the things that I think are the most important for the clients that I really want to work with the most are businesses who truly value their craft. So for instance, like a woodworker that does everything by hand, or, a company that makes local, products that are like American made and all of that. Like that's very important to me. Or like people that don't just make fast products, but people that make really
craftspeople.
Yeah. Handcrafted stuff, right? So if I have two clients in my inbox and one is making like artisan handmade rocking chairs and the other one is, fast fashion t-shirts, I'm going to pick the rocking chair guy. All right. And so and of course that just comes with more time, but I do think it's important to, be thinking about that kind of stuff. So, all right, what kind of clients am I taking? Because also the kind of clients you take are going to be what you have in your portfolio. Right? So if you're taking a bunch of clients that don't really align with what you want to be doing in the future, either you're not going to be able to add those to your portfolio because you don't really want people to see that and associate you with it, or you're going to have work on your portfolio that just isn't going to lead you in a direction you want to go. I've done a few jobs. Actually, these are always really fun. I've done a few jobs for like video games, doing video games. And they are so fun. They're so fun, but I never ever put those on my website because they don't really fall within that like kind of old-timey hand-lettered feeling that is my very favorite to do. So even though I love doing these like highly rendered, illustrated video game logos, I don't advertise that as much because that's not really what I want to be known for and it's not what I want to do. It doesn't mean that's not great work and I don't enjoy it, but I want to maybe do 2 of those a year, right? I don't want to do a whole bunch. But if you're someone that like you want to be in the gaming industry, in the animation industry, then that's the kind of stuff you would want on your portfolio. Yeah. So I think also going back to not waiting for work to come to you, the work that you create either in your spare time or whatever, that can really lead to the types of clients you're going to get. All right. So if you really want to do packaging, then design packaging in your spare time, even for fake stuff.
Totally.
A couple of years ago, I was like, man, I would really love some more packaging clients. So in October, every day of the month, I designed a new fake packaging design for something Halloween themed. So it was like spider powder and, that kind of stuff. It was just silly. But I got a lot of packaging jobs after that because people saw these fake packaging projects I was doing and they loved them. And that's that. So, if you have a particular type of client you want or job you want, make sure that's the kind of thing you're putting out into the world, because then your clients or potential clients will start to associate you with that type of specific work that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Bernie Wiles, which is a sponsor of the podcast and also a business of mine, started out as being the exact same thing. For our branding agency, MRC, we wanted to dive more into CPG stuff. And so we basically made up a product, which in turn, actually, we got a successful Kickstarter campaign going and we raised the money to get it into production. And now it's a real thing, but it did totally help us in so many different ways. Before we move out of this topic, I did want to just touch on how to expand your reach in today's context. We got social media and physical networking and, outside of, because, the reality is that not everybody is going to be living in a town where they can, go down the street and talk to the local, coffee shop or whatever, or they may not hardly have any budget whatsoever. What are the different ways that people can expand their reach given the context of the technological world we're living in now?
Yeah, well, social media is huge, right? And I've always told people I've done all of my marketing for free. I've never spent money on ads, never done any of that, right? You can do a lot with the tools that we have that are completely free. Social media is a huge one. Social media, my platform of choice is Instagram. That's probably a lot of people's. But that's a really great place to show your work in a way where it's going to be constantly in people's minds. Okay? So, of course, having a website is incredible. We can talk about that in the next section about being professional. I'm a big believer in having a really nice website. But the beautiful thing about social media is that's a way that your followers can interact with you on a daily basis. And it's a true thing that people are going to remember the stuff they see the most, okay? So if you're really consistent and you can share a piece of work every single day, and they can be repeats, it doesn't always have to be something new every day, but just putting your stuff out there, that's just going to make you so you're present in people's mind. And so if someone, is looking at Instagram on their lunch break and they see something cool you drew, and then right after lunch they're in a meeting and they need to hire a designer for a campaign, they're going to be more likely to think of you than of, some random person's website that they saw a few years ago. So being active on social media is just a great way to just make sure you're in people's minds. But it's also a really great way to show who you are as a person, right? Maybe if you're like, what's her name? Your buddy Meg. She's a really funny designer. But her whole brand is that she's like an artist, but she's also a comedian. And so she gets on and tells jokes and does stuff. But because of this, she gets these really wacky clients who they love her art, but they also just love her personality, right? But if you're really serious and really, nostalgic or something, you can show that really well on social media and attract other people who love the same things as you. Other really great social media platforms, actually Pinterest. Pinterest is surprisingly good. And the reason Pinterest...
That's what I keep hearing. Yeah. I keep hearing. I don't know how to utilize it as well as probably it could be maximized.
Yeah, so I didn't either. Here's the thing about Pinterest, okay? Pinterest is a slow burn. So Pinterest is like the opposite of Instagram. So with Instagram, you post something, and the longer it's on Instagram, the less it's going to be seen. Pinterest is the opposite. You put something on Pinterest, and no one sees it at first, but like 6 months later, it'll be seen more. So Pinterest is weird because the longer something's on Pinterest, the more it gets seen. So Pinterest is really wonderful because it has this really long shelf life and really good searchability. So if people are searching for like event mural, right? And you shared something 3 years ago, there's a good chance that's going to pop up first on Pinterest. So Pinterest is one I do recommend for people. And the other nice thing about it is you don't have to be quite so consistent every day because it's more of a slow burn, right? So you can get on Pinterest maybe once a month and pin 20 things, that you've created. And then you don't have to worry about it anymore. It just kind of sits on there and does its own thing. So Pinterest is actually pretty cool. Email marketing is a surprisingly good one. I use email marketing less for my clients, like my freelance clients, and more for my other audience. So that includes other artists that follow me, people that maybe really enjoy my work but don't have $5,000 for a project, but maybe still want to be involved in my brand somehow. I have an email marketing campaign where, I sell like smaller physical products or fonts or classes and things like that.
Yeah, right.
That's a really great way to connect with people, just through one of those. And same thing, an email list is something you can grow slowly. There's not a ton of pressure to grow it fast, but it's a really nice way to connect very directly with the people who you're working with.
How do you do that typically? Do you do that by having people, like inviting people to subscribe on your website, or do you do it more heavily through social media, asking people to do that? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so what I've done is I just have a little pop-up on my website when people visit, and it says like, don't miss out on the good stuff or whatever, and do that. But actually, the thing that I'm really proud of with my email is that I actually get people asking me a lot if they can sign up for my emails. And it's because they are so good. So one thing I'm a big believer with in email marketing is do not just send out a crap ton of emails. Everybody hates that, okay? There's nothing worse than getting a bunch of emails that just don't matter. So what I do is I send out only 1 or 2 emails a month, and they are jam-packed with like just good stuff, like value. Like for instance, once we're done with this podcast and this episode comes out, like I will be linking to it in this email, right? So I only send out a couple a month, but they're really good. And what actually has happened is people will tell their friends, they'll be like, oh my gosh, I got this really great article from Type Affiliated on this and this. And then they go, well, how do I get that? And they go, oh, well, you've got to be on the email list. And so if you truly make your emails like have value, and you really think about your audience, like, am I just sending this to send this, or am I sending this to try to make someone's life better? Then your email marketing can be really successful. Like I have a really low unsubscribe rate, but it's because I don't just send people garbage. They know that when they get one from me, it's only going to be once.
It's going to be something special.
Yeah, and there's going to be really good stuff in there. So honestly, it's kind of weird, but word of mouth has been a way I've grown mine. But then also sometimes I'll share something on Instagram and just say, hey, today I sent out this fun article to the people on my email list. If you want to join, here's a link. So there's certain things I only share with the email people. They usually just have a little bit more value than the regular Instagram stuff.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, because there's a lot of I think there are a lot of designers who feel that Instagram is great. And then there's also a lot of designers who feel like, oh, that's old hat, and now it's like everything is TikTok. Right? Like one of our previous guests, Savannah Verville from Little Savage Design, she's like, she sells her wear like constantly on TikTok. And I think it depends a lot on personality too, and your comfort level. I mean, I know like Lisa Congdon, who, is fantastic and very prolific. She's doubled down on Instagram. She's just like, no, this is my space, and this is where you'll find me. Not to be confused with MySpace. But anyway, okay, that's great. And I want to make sure that we're leaving enough time for all these other bullets we got. So let's move on from that. We could talk about each of these all day. Oh my God. Yes, we could. And I'm trying my best to not contribute too much because I want to get as much out of you as possible. Okay, so moving into the next topic, and you were sort of alluding to this before about always being professional. So let's talk a little bit about that. What does that look like to you, and what are the principles of what, your perception of being professional are? Okay, I'm a huge believer in this one, in presenting yourself as a professional. So as a freelancer, especially, you are the person in control of your image or your brand. And it drives me crazy when people will get on, a video or an email or whatever, or even just in a real person conversation, and they'll go, well, I'm just a freelancer, and I've only been doing it a few years, and I'm just this or I'm just that. It's like, no, if you don't think that you're serious, like, and you're not presenting yourself like you're serious, then why would anyone else think that you're serious? Okay, if you're walking around downplaying what you do, you're not going to get the work you want. Okay, it is so important. If you are a professional, you need to own it.
Okay, that's another thing I always tell the students. So I was doing professional work while I was still a student, all right? And I never on my website or anything was like, I'm a student at Utah Valley University. No, I am a lettering artist, right? Because as soon as people know you're a student, they're going to try to take advantage of you. That's basically like saying, I'm not experienced, I don't know what I'm doing. And it doesn't matter. If you're a student, you're learning. But guess what? Everyone is learning all the time, right? And so regardless of what stage you are, you need to treat yourself like you know what you're doing. And everyone's figuring stuff out, right? If you think that, like, you look at these people like Martina Floor, right? I'm sure Martina Floor is still figuring some things out. No one knows everything, all right? But if you focus on the things you don't know, other people are going to think you don't know what you're doing, okay? And not that they fake it till you make it, because that's not true. Be honest about what you can do. Be honest about your capabilities. But do not downplay them, okay? Yeah. And so also with being professional, and this could even tie into the TikTok thing, right? You have to decide what kind of person you want to be when you're in public, when you're networking, or when you're presenting yourself online, right? So maybe if you are someone like Lauren Hom, she's a lettering artist, and part of her brand is that she throws in swear words a lot, right? And it's funny, and sometimes that gets her some edgy clients. Right? But if you're working in like the high-end wedding industry and you're throwing the F word on your platform, you're not going to get those clients. All right. So you have to be very purposeful about the way you want to present yourself and who you're trying to attract, and being professional. Right. So same thing too on your website, in your bio. Don't write things like, I'm just this or that, or I'm kind of learning, or I'm not really sure. Be assertive about what you are. Present yourself as a professional.
I think this really ties back to this idea of what you're mentioning about like not projecting yourself confidently in the work that you're doing and the value you're bringing to people, right? Confidence, I think, is a really big issue. You could even be in the industry for 10 years and still project yourself that way. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of times what's tied into that is this fear of failure or that you're not good enough, right? And for me, I just wanted to... I'll sort of start with my own feelings about that. A lot of times what I've discovered is that I've had my insecurities and leaned into that type of emotional expression towards people when I'm talking about my work. And I'm not like that anymore because I discovered that it's not a value to me personally, but it's also not great for wanting to get the kinds of clients and the kind of work that I want. So failure to me, what I've discovered is also a myth, because if you can change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, right? So for me, what I discovered is that it was less about, it's almost like what Yoda says, it's like do or do not, there is no try, right? So what you need to do is just step into it and discover what you learn, right? Yeah, because the only real failure, as far as I'm concerned, is not reflecting back on what you learned from it, right? So even if it's not as good, because it's usually subjective, even if it's not as good as you may have thought it could have been, you're still going to learn and grow from that if you take the time to reflect and see how you could do it better next time, right? Because there's always a next time if you allow yourself to do that. So what are your thoughts about failure and the fear of failure and how that can project out into the world and your audience potentially? And how do you overcome that?
I think that's perfect. I mean, I love what you said about you get to decide. Like, you can't decide when you fail or when you succeed, but you can decide what you're going to do with that, right? So if you fail at something and then you go, well, I reached out to that client and they said no, so I give up and I'm never going outside again, then that didn't do you any good. But if you fail and you go, I should have phrased this differently, or I should have tried to meet them in person before I sent this email, right? If you just learn from it and then do it differently, you're going to be great. One thing I always like to tell people is if you're ever worried about doing something, whether that's reaching out to a client or starting a new passion project, right? One thing I tell people a lot is I'm like, well, you're already not working with that client. So if they say no, your life's going to be the same, okay? It's not going to be worse. It's going to be exactly the same, right? There's literally nothing to lose other than maybe just like feeling a tiny bit sad.
Right. And that's just a perspective.
Yeah. And the thing also about failure, guys, is it gets It gets way easier the more you do it. Like, that sounds kind of depressing, but it's true, and it's not depressing. Like, once you fail a couple times and you realize that life goes on and you're fine and it's not the end of the world, then you're way less scared about failing again, right? It's so easy. Like, I actually had someone tell me one time, they're like, you should do one thing that freaks you out every single day. Because if you do that, then you realize, like, oh, you know, I was really scared to go talk to that person, or I was really scared to send an email asking a question to this artist that I really admire, but I did it, and it was no big deal, and I'm fine.
Yeah.
It builds resilience.
Yeah, I agree. Another great piece of advice in line with that too is that, you know, this fear of rejection, this fear of not being good enough, fear can just like drag you in the ground and stop you from really living an amazing life. And as a creative, I think we live in that fear often because art is so subjective, and you may not feel that confidence in the work that you're doing, even though it's self-perceived, because a lot of people can probably think you're an amazing art. We have heard countless stories of incredibly talented and highly prolific and highly lauded creatives who still feel like they're not good enough. Yeah. So this is pervasive, right?
And another thing I think is really important is sometimes you just have to, like, it sounds funny, but sometimes you just need to look yourself in the mirror and just say, like, I am good enough for where I am right now. Because a lot of times we focus way too much on where we want to be in 10 years or whatever, and we think, like, well, because I'm not good enough to be hired by Coca-Cola, there's just no point. And it's like, well, maybe you're not good enough to be hired by Coca-Cola right now, but you're perfect for that bakery down the street that needs a new logo. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's another question. Sometimes people say, like, well, when do I know if I'm ready to work for clients? And I'm like, if you can make any kind of art, you are ready. It doesn't mean your client is necessarily going to be this huge Fortune 500 company at the moment, but there is someone out there that needs what you do right now at the level that you do it. And as you get better and improve over time, your clients will improve along with you, you know? But there's no reason to, like, wait around until the stars are aligned to start doing this kind of stuff, right? You just need to do it. And you'll find people that need what you can do right now. And as you get better, you'll find people that need what you can do then.
Great. Are there any other highlighted tips that you want to talk about being professional before we move on to the next bullet?
I guess maybe just one is again, on Instagram or social media in general, just be purposeful about what you're putting on there, right? I don't think there's anything less professional than someone who has, like, an art page and then all of a sudden there's a random picture of, like, their 2-year-old eating macaroni, right? You'll love your 2-year-old. Your 2-year-old is great. They do not belong on your business page, all right? And so being just purposeful about making sure that, like, if a client was looking at that, you know, there's no pictures of you drunk at a party, you know, nothing like that you'd be embarrassed by. But another thing is also, when you're sharing your work, I mean, be purposeful about the way you present it, right? Take the time to take a decent photo. Take the time to write a caption. Don't be self-deprecating, okay? Never say something like, well, this isn't very good, but I thought I'd share it, right? That is called compliment fishing. It is frowned upon, right? Don't do that. Even if you're still not sure, you can say something along the lines of, like, you know, this is a work in progress that I'm really excited about. I wonder how it's going to develop, right? That's a way more positive way to say, I don't really know what I'm doing here, right?
Right,
so
yeah.
I guess it's just really important, because if you don't present yourself well, or if you don't act like you know what you're doing, if you're nervous all the time and unsure all the time, people are going to just think you don't know what you're doing, right? So don't fake it, but be really honest and say, you know what, I do know what I'm doing. You know, I do know how to do this. I am good at what I do, and don't be afraid of that.
You know, I would like to propose making one amendment to your suggestion about how to post on your art page, because I do think that there is, it's almost like what you were referring to earlier about being in a space where you develop what your personality is going to be on social media. And part of that personality really could be And it's just a matter of just being strategic. And this ties back into the professionalism part, right? It's being strategic about how you're presenting yourself. So you could obviously develop a social media presence, a social media personality where people expect to see, your 2-year-old mixed in there. And maybe there's like a bit of your printed pieces that like, for example, Printed Peanut, I think is like a great example. Yeah. She now has children and, but she's incredibly prolific and people love the fact that she shows all this amazing work, but then she'll show some imagery of her and her baby and there's probably like printed pieces behind the photograph of her and the child and stuff like that. So it still ties back in. Yeah, and it feels like maybe
make sure it somehow ties in or feels like it belongs. Or even, let's say you're a mom, right? And you're a designer and you want to work with brands that maybe design baby clothes or design products for children, right? Then it is useful to say, hey, I'm a mom. Like, I get this. As a mom, I know what other people want, and I want to create designs that are going to help moms, right? That's beneficial. Or if you really want to work with food brands, it's beneficial to maybe draw some, if you're taking a picture of your meal at the fancy restaurant, maybe doodle something on the napkin and include that in the photo as well to tie it all in, right? There's nothing wrong with sharing your personal life, but just make sure you're doing it in a very intentional manner, I guess is what I would say.
Perfect. All right, let's move on to topic number, what I would probably say topic number 4, which is getting over your fear of contracts, which I think is really important and a lot to probably dive into here.
Yeah. I was talking to a guy the other day. This was like just a week ago. We were talking about this and that, and he goes, well, I don't use contracts because sometimes when I send a client a contract, it makes them nervous and then they don't want to work with me. And I was like, that is the main reason you should use contracts, okay? If you send a contract to a client and they don't want to sign it, do not work with that person. Like, that's like,
step away from the client.
Okay? And so I think getting over fear of contracts, especially for beginners, is just so important because a lot of us do have this worry of like, oh, if I send them a contract, are they going to think that I don't trust them? Or are they going to think, that I'm making this way more serious than it needs to be? Or, hey, they're my friend. I don't need a contract for them. No, always, always, always have a contract. The point of a contract isn't just to protect you. It's to protect you and your client. A contract should simply just be a list of everything that's included in the project and very clear descriptions of what the client is responsible and what you are responsible for. And it doesn't need to be scary. It doesn't need to be hard. Another misconception is like, ooh, I have to get a lawyer to write my contract. I have to get, it has to be 1,000,000 pages long and have big, scary words. No, it doesn't. It just needs to be a simple agreement that clearly outlines both parties' responsibilities in a project. But the other thing with the fear of contracts is if you have a contract, do not be afraid to reference back to the contract, okay? That's why it's there. That's the other thing. I've talked to friends who are designers and they go, oh man, this client wants more revisions, but they only get 3, but I'm so nervous to tell them that. And I'm like, why? They signed the contract that said they got 3 revisions. Yes. All you have to do is just say, hey, I'd love to do more revisions for you. As per the contract, 3 revisions are included in this price, but if you want to pay extra, we can do that for you, okay? I have never once had a client get mad about me referring back to something in a contract. Never.
Definitely.
In fact, usually they're happy about it. I just sent off a contract this morning for a really small project that was so small that maybe it seems silly to have a contract, but this is not even a joke. This is a true story. But the client emailed me back and was like, hey, thank you so much for sending me this and just perfectly outlining it. That gives me some real peace of mind. Okay.
Totally.
It's not just for you. It's for you and for your client. And also, having a contract, like we talked about before earlier, about being professional, it helps your client understand that you're not messing around, right? Your time is valuable. Their money is valuable. The project is valuable to both of you. So, I really don't have that much else to say other than just if you have hesitations about it and you're worried that people are going to think you don't trust them, that's not true. A contract is a way to show that you are a trustworthy person and that you are committing to something and that you're going to follow it through and expect them to also be at that same level of trust.
Exactly. And I also want to go back to the fear of failure component to this, because I've had my branding agency for, it'll be 13 years. Actually, I think it's 13 years now. And we're still evolving our contract, believe it or not, because other things come up that you don't anticipate until later on. It could be the 700th client that you're dealing with. And finally, something emerges from that relationship where you're like, you know what? We need to add this to the contract.
Absolutely.
So don't worry about getting it perfect. Try to think about the most important things for the contract that you are aware of today, and realize that you may make a mistake. You may find that you could probably get screwed on something because you don't have something in the contract. But it is just like any other thing. Writing contracts, just like owning a business, just like living a good life, is an evolving system, you know? And so, I definitely think that don't worry about getting it perfect. Just try to get it as good as possible, and you'll learn along the way how to refine it.
Yeah. Like one example of that, I just in the last month added a thing to my contract about if a client cancels a meeting, because I had one client where every time we'd set up a time to meet, she'd end up canceling it like half hour before. So I added a thing to my contract that said for every time a client cancels a meeting, there's going to be this much of a fee. Right. And that's something that wasn't in there before, but it's something that's in there now. So that's never going to happen again. Right.
Yeah.
And so your contract should be an ever evolving thing. Right. And it should change too, depending on the project and depending on what you're working on. But don't be afraid of having a contract. No one's going to think you're mean for having a contract, and no one's going to think you're being rude if you refer back to it and say, I'd love to do that for you, but I actually can't because it's not in the contract,
And that goes back to the idea of being professional.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah. All right. Awesome. So let's move on to the next one. So you've got here, rethink how you spend and make money. Again, going back to this idea of getting a minor in business, like having an understanding of how to do that. I will say that I was not raised in a family where we talked about that when I was a kid, just about the idea of budgeting and saving and making good use of the money that you make. And I think a lot of people, they don't have to be creatives, let's be honest. They're, something between 500 and 750,000 businesses, small businesses that start up every year. Mm-hmm. And half of them, I think, wind up like closing up shop after 2 years. So there's many, many times that's a result of the financial component. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Awesome. So I like to always say, rethink the way you, have a relationship with money, because money is a tricky thing for a lot of people, but it doesn't have to be. And the very first point that I always like to bring up is that it doesn't matter how much money you have if you don't know how to manage it well. Okay. One example I always love to use, when I was just barely starting college, I had a job as a waitress, and my roommate was also a waitress at the same restaurant as me. So we basically had the same set expenses, right? We both had the same rent for our apartment. We had the same, kind of gas that we needed to do or whatever. And we had the exact same income because we had the same job. All right. I was always putting money into savings, and it was never an issue. My friend was calling her dad every week because she was out of money and was always struggling, or always trying to figure out how she was going to be able to put gas in her car because it was such a struggle. And I think that was the first time I realized it doesn't matter how much money you make, because if you don't know how to handle it, that's what really makes the difference. We had the exact same income, but because I knew how to save mine and manage it, I had a really easy life. But because she didn't, she had a really hard life, and it was a constant struggle. So it's the same with your business. A lot of times people have this whole idea, and there's actually a lot of tests on this in psychology you can go and read. It's very interesting. People always feel like if they made about 20% more than what they actually make, that they'd be okay. All right. But that's people that make $100,000 a year. That's people that make $30,000. They all feel that way. They all feel like if they just made 20% more than what they actually make, they'd be all right. Okay. Wow. So one thing I love to tell people is you are already making enough money. And sometimes people go, well, I'm not making enough money. I'm really struggling. That's probably because you're not managing it well. Okay. If you really feel like you're struggling, The trick is probably not that you need to make more money. It's that you need to rethink the way you're spending. All right. You need to cut back on expenses. You need to really look at the things you're doing and say, do these matter? Do they not? Just like right now with inflation, everyone's been complaining, oh, life is so hard, this and that. And it's like, well, is it, or are you just not being able to make, are you not making active choices about where your money's going? And so I know that's a hard one. I know people are always like, that's crazy. Like, I'm really not making enough money. Okay. You can make a little go a really long way if you're purposeful about it. The other thing that's really important to understand, as far as money with freelance goes, is that you need to understand that billing is going to work differently than a regular job. Okay. So at a regular job, you show up and you're there for a certain number of hours and you get paid the whole time you're there. With freelance, you have to do a lot of what are called non-billable tasks. Non-billable tasks, right? That's your client outreach. That's creating invoices. That's doing your budget and finances. That's your marketing. That's recording videos. That's going to the post office, right? There's tons of stuff that you do every day as a freelancer that falls under the category of non-billable hours. So if you're pricing your work in a way where you're really making, like, let's say you're making $25 an hour for your client projects, okay? Not enough, because that is not taking into account all the time that you're spending doing these non-billable tasks, okay? In August, I actually was wondering about this because I'd never really sat down and just tracked my hours. And so in August, I was like, I'm going to track every single thing that I do and figure out exactly how much time I really spend on stuff. And when I did this, I found out that I actually only spent 47% of my time doing billable client work, which means the other 53% is stuff I don't get paid for. But it's stuff that matters. It's stuff that helps me manage the clients. It's stuff that helps me get clients. It's stuff that helps me build a brand. A lot of it's stuff that's going to make me money later. Okay. But that's 53% of my time is not spent actively making money. So when you're setting your prices for your freelance work, you have to remember that, which means, roughly, like for me, I don't charge hourly. That's a whole nother conversation about actually how to price your work. We could talk about that all day. I don't charge hourly, but if I finished a project and then looked back and did the math and broke it down, I end up making usually about $250 an hour, okay, for a project. And people might look at that and say, oh my gosh, $250 an hour, that's insane, okay? But what that number is including is all of your past experience and all the work you're doing outside of that project to make that project happen. So if you feel weird about your pricing and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't charge that much, I'm not good enough to be charging that much. Yes, you are. Okay. Because the price that you're charging for your clients, it's not just that. It's not just that project. It's everything that goes into getting to that project in the first place and all your experience and all of that. So that's a big conversation. The other really important thing with money is you have to understand that as a freelancer, your income is not going to be regular, okay? There might be a month where you make $20,000. There might be a different month you make $150, okay? So you have to be able to be responsible enough to manage your income in a responsible way. So what I do is we could talk about this all day. I'll try to simplify it as much as I can.
No problem, yeah.
I pay myself a set amount every 2 weeks, okay? So that means, let's say 1 week I do make $20,000. I do not just pay myself that full $20,000, okay? I pay myself a set amount. And what that does is it helps you to just have a more regular life, right? So just like a regular job, I get paid the same amount every 2 weeks. But the other great thing about that is, so if there is a month where, let's say, I only make $100, I can still pay myself that regular amount, because if the month before I made a whole lot, right, that kind of, it all evens out. The other thing that's really important is to have savings. So I have 6 months of income savings in an account all the time, because you never know when something's going to happen, okay? Last year, some of you guys that maybe know me know, I had to take 2 entire months off of work because I had a pretty big medical thing I had to do. So for 2 whole months, I wasn't able to work. And I was stressed out with medical stuff and stressed out about if I was feeling well and stressed out about all these things. But the one thing I didn't have to worry about was money. because it was there. All right. And so, you know, if you are a freelancer, you need to just be planning for that. And it's not even just medical emergencies, right? Remember COVID? I knew a ton of people that all of a sudden filed for unemployment because they weren't sure what to do. If you're a freelancer, like your whole life is COVID or like kind of that thing, not knowing if you're going to be able to get work. Like I had a bunch of friends that had regular jobs. And when COVID hit, they were like, oh, I don't know what to do this month. I was like, well, that's like all the time if you're a freelancer. Right? I have an uncle that's a children's book illustrator. He only gets paid 4 times a year, usually, right? Children's book illustrators, you illustrate maybe 3 or 4 books a year, okay?
Yeah.
If you only get paid 3 times a year, you better not spend it all at once. You better be able to manage it, right? So it's very important to have savings, to not just spend money when you have it, but to actually make sure you've got it. Pay your taxes. Make sure that you're billing in a way that accounts for taxes. Taxes are going to be about 25% of your income, okay? So make sure that you're billing according to that. And also make sure you're investing in your business. So every time I get paid for a project, I guess just to tell you guys, and if you go to my website, typeaffiliated.com, and you go, there's a tab called Fun Stuff. I actually have an entire article all on how I price. It's really helpful. But what I do is every single time I get paid, I automatically take 25% out and put it into taxes. And then I don't think about it anymore. It's in a savings account just for taxes, okay? And then out of what's left, I take 80% and I put it to my income. So I pay myself out of that group. But then the other 20%, I split into a couple different things. So I put 5% into a supplies account, right? So for buying paint, paper, whatever, ink. I put 5% into an education account. So if I want to go to a conference or something, I've got a nice little budget for that. 5% into other. So that's just like, you know, anything. Like if I have a business lunch or Adobe Illustrator, that kind of stuff. And then 5% into, currently it's into an account for a new laptop, right? And it's just a little bit, you know, if you get paid $1,000, then you take the 25% out and do that. It ends up being what, maybe $20 or something, right? But it adds up over time. And by being smart and investing in your business, that gives you wiggle room to do things like, you know, take care of your website or make new products or this or that. Or if you want to hire someone, right? There's times I need to hire photographers or other freelancers to outsource some stuff. And there's a nice little, lovely little budget for that. So I guess, again, we could talk about money all day, but I think the thing that's the most important though, with money is to take control over it and to get over this attitude of there's not enough money. I don't know where my money is. I can't control my money. It's no, you as a freelancer are more in control of your money than anyone else. You decide how much you charge. You decide how much work you take. You decide where that money goes. All right. So you can either let your money control you or you can control your money. And your life is going to be way easier if you are the one making purposeful decisions about your money, about what you charge, and about all of that.
I love it. So one thing I would probably add to that too, just to maybe give a little bit more context to, at least this has been the case for me, is I am happy that I'm able to be fairly good at a number of things, not just creatively, but also like running a business, you know, and working with a team and stuff like that. But there are definitely things that I'm not very strong at. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, when we first started talking about this, you know, money was definitely not something that I was very good at understanding, being responsible for it. And I would suggest that if you don't feel good about where you feel you are in terms of your strength for finances, there are obviously lots of different routes you can go. You can start budgeting, at least to start looking at, you know, getting a bookkeeper to help you out with this stuff. You know, hire an accountant. I mean, obviously everybody's either going to have an accountant or they're just going to go to H&R Block or whatever, but definitely look into potentially getting a bookkeeper so that you're focusing on the other things that are really important. Obviously other things like, you know, doing a couple courses online that could just help you kind of get the fundamentals so that when you're talking to a bookkeeper, you can even call out some things that the bookkeeper might not be aware of, right? So there's different ways that you can, you know, sort of evade some of the weaknesses you have. I think it's totally okay to not be good at some things and find ways to find the resources to get them done, so that you're just there focusing on what your strengths are, and then finding others to help you out where their strengths are.
Absolutely.
And it's definitely something that for me, in my case, as a not just a designer, creative director, but the owner of a branding agency, is there are definitely parts of the creative process that I'm not very good at, but I'm very grateful for hiring people that are really good at them, so that we can sort of have this Voltron, where all the powers are activated. The sum is, what is it? The sum is greatest with all the parts coming together, right? So, very, very important thing to think about.
Failure, right? You can't look at it and say, well, I don't know how to save and I don't know how to budget, so I guess I'll just never do it. It's like, just start, right? Just start. And if you mess up one month and you go, oh, dang it, I overspent, that doesn't mean you just never try again, right? You just keep trying. And again, it's a slow burn. If you're just saving a tiny bit every month, it's going to take a while, but eventually you're going to have a really nice, a really good place. You're going to be in a good place. So don't be scared of it. Just try it out.
Excellent. Yes. So you have one more bullet, but before we go into that, I wanted to ask you something that I feel is really connected, and I also think it's really important. Mm-hmm. As I was just mentioning, I've got a team that can help me put together a lot of the things that we've got going on, and we have a ton of things going on, and you have a ton of things going on. Now, you're some sort of like weird superhero kind of person who seems to be handling all these types of things. So I'm just curious, And maybe this will make me feel even worse about myself, but let's hear how you organize all those balls in the air. Do you find that you need to also get other people to help you put stuff together? Because you are not just the creator, you're also the business owner. I should clarify, you're not only the sole creator, you're also the sole, business, the person running the business.
Yeah.
So how do you juggle all of those things without feeling overwhelmed and in a way that feels organized and efficient and also easy for you, so that you've got time to breathe and just be creative?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the biggest things I would say that I do is I'm pretty good at time management. So one of the benefits, it's a blessing and it's a curse, right, of being a freelancer, is that you get to set your own hours. So for a lot of people, that means that they just start whenever they want and they just kind of finish whenever they want. For me, that doesn't work. I've had to be really good about saying, okay, I'm going to start at 9 every day. I'm going to finish at 5 every day. And for me, that's really beneficial, because what it does is first off, it helps me, value my time at work and say, no, this is when I work. But it also helps me to value my time outside of work, right? If a client wants something and it's 5:15, they have to wait till tomorrow, right? Because work is not your whole life, right? You have to have a life outside of that. And if you can learn to manage your time really well at work, then you enjoy your life more when you're not working. So one thing I do is super old school. I mean, I guess the people in the podcast won't be able to see this, but you can. I use a planner. And I'm really good about a planner. So every day I split my day into 3 sections. So it's business, creative, and other. My policy is worst first. So whatever tasks I don't want to do the most, I get those done first, right? So that's emails, invoices. If I have like a call I really don't want to make, right? I do all of that stuff very first.
Spreadsheets.
Yeah, spreadsheets. Ugh, all that boring stuff. I get that
the worst.
first. Because I find that once that's done, it's a lot easier to be creative, right? Because I'm not thinking like, oh man, I have to send this contract to that guy and I really don't want to. If you just get it done, worst first, if you just do it, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. And so
such a great point.
Yeah. And then I also have tasks that I do every day. And this is something I've started doing in the last year, but it's been really, really helpful in kind of keeping up on some of those things that are important that you don't necessarily have time for. So every Monday I do client outreach for an hour. So that's researching clients I want to work with, actually reaching out to them. On Tuesday, I do past client support for an hour. So So that's checking in with old clients who maybe I haven't seen in a long time.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, just being like, hey, how are you? How did that project work out? You know, you guys doing good? Do you need anything? And actually, that's been huge. In this past year, 56% of my clients were returning clients. And I'll tell you, it's way easier to get a returning client to get you to do another project than it is to find a completely new one. And just by doing that outreach, just by saying, hey, how are you guys? How did that work out? Is a great way to open the door, because it happens all the time where they're like, oh, we love our menu that you designed. Hey, actually, can you do this packaging thing for us too? We've been meaning to reach out, but just never think about it. So I do client outreach every Tuesday, which is really nice. That's also I send thank you gifts to clients, kind of like you do, right? And just say, hey, thanks. You know, I love working with you. And so by setting a set time every week to do that, it kind of helps me stay on top of it.
Incidentally, by the way, I love that you have the exact percentage of returning business, 56%.
Yeah, it's nice. I'm big on data. I track all this stuff. I really like the numbers, and which is funny. I'm not a numbers person, but I like to know what's going on in my business, and I like things to be purposeful. So I always know, like, this is the percentage that are in Utah. This is the percentage that are out of state. These are the percentage of all the different things.
Love it.
Wednesdays, I work on my online class. So that's marketing my online class, you know, coming up with stuff to share for the online class. So I do that every Wednesday. Thursday is type affiliated brand day. So that's when I update my website. That's when I make assets just for type affiliated, right? Maybe make a product for type affiliated. And that's important too, because there's nothing worse than updating your website when you haven't done it in 2 or 3 years. Okay, it's a nightmare. But if every single Thursday, or even if you're like, I don't want to do it every week, maybe I want to do it once a month, you just get on and just say, here's a new project or two I'm just going to throw up on there. It's so easy, and it makes it so that the work is current and everything. And then on Friday, every week I do a weekly review where I go through the whole week and just say, all right, what did I do? What was good? What was bad? You know, what do I want to change? And what do I want to do the next week? And so for me, just doing those small things every week for only like a half hour, 45 minutes, or an hour every week, it helps everything stay moving along really, really well. So if you schedule in time to do that kind of stuff, it makes a huge, huge difference in running your business, I think.
Awesome. Okay. This takes us down to the last bullet. Hayley, are you ready?
Yeah.
Which is a good one. You know, we've been on this flight now for about an hour or so, and now we're coming down for a landing. So this is a good one to sort of like get that soft landing.
They're going to be like, let's talk about your seatbelts, stow your tray table.
Let's talk about leaving your house.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This is the last thing that I feel very strongly about, which is the importance of leaving your house as a freelancer. So isolation is a real thing, okay? And if you're all alone all the time, first off, you're going to get depressed. Even if you're an introvert, you're going to get depressed. But also, it's hard to work through ideas on your own. It's hard to make connections on your own. And it's really hard to get inspired on your own. So I think one of the best things you can do as a freelancer is to go outside, okay? Even if that's just walking around your block and moving. But also, I think it's really important to get involved with your community. So for me, I have a goal. If anyone invites me to anything, I go, okay? If it's in the creative realm, even if it's something where I'm like, oh, some weird like performance art show that I'm not really interested in. If someone invites me, I will always go. And you know what? I never regret it, because even if it's the weirdest thing ever, you never know who you're going to meet. You never know what opportunities are going to come up from it. And actually going out in the real world and talking to people and interacting with people, that's one of the best ways to get inspired, to remember why you love what you do, and to, I feel like, just get new ideas and meet people. And I can't tell you how many people I've met just by showing up at things who have led to amazing opportunities. Like the guy that manages my online class, his name is Darren. He's amazing. I met him at a concert one time, just a local concert here. We were talking, and it came up that he does film and editing, and I was like, oh, I want to film an online class. And he was like, oh, well, we should do that sometime. And that's how we met. And now that's like a huge chunk of my income is that. But it was just because I went outside and met someone. Yeah. So I just think get involved in your community, meet new people, go to things, and get out of your house, because it's really easy to get depressed or even just to get stuck in one particular way of thinking about things, So have friends. Like, another thing I do is every Friday at lunchtime, I go to Draw Lunch, which is a group of illustrators. It's all these old guys and me. But we come together every Friday, and just for a couple hours, we just draw and eat lunch together. But it is the best thing ever, just to network and get to meet people and think about things or get excited about things again. See what other people are working on. Go outside. Leave your house sometimes.
Love it. And as we were just talking about earlier, I think before we started pressing record, you're from Utah, so being outside is probably a very, very advantageous part of living where you live. So that's perfect. Well, that's great. This has been really, really awesome, Hayley. We went above the time that I'm holding you here longer than normal. So I really appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us and sharing all this awesome wisdom and advice. And before we close it out, as always, I'd love for you to just let the people know where they can find you. Yeah, thank you. So my business is Type Affiliated. So you can find me at typeaffiliated.com, on Instagram and TikTok and all the things at Type Affiliated. Yeah, just if you Google Type Affiliated, you'll find me. And I love answering questions. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, but you have more questions about something I said, I've got tons of resources on that website, or you can just shoot me an email. I'm always happy to help people out. But I really appreciate you having me back, Mike. I love talking to you about this stuff. Definitely. And I know we'll have you back some other time soon to talk more. Awesome. So we'll just leave it at that. Hayley, thanks so much again, and I hope to talk to you soon. Have a great rest of your week. Hey, see ya.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a Leadhead. And we're out.